The psychology of everyday mistakes. Today we move to another important source of evidence that Freud believed revealed the workings of the unconscious. He called these the mistakes of everyday life. According to Freud, ordinary errors are rarely as accidental as they appear. They deserve careful psychological analysis because they may point toward hidden motives, unresolved conflicts, or wishes that exist outside conscious awareness. What kinds of mistakes did he have in mind? He included slips of the tongue, mistakes in writing, forgetting intentions, and even the mysterious loss of everyday objects. Imagine a simple situation. You walk into a room with a specific purpose. The moment you arrive, you stop and think, "Why did I come in here?" You know you had something to do. A few seconds ago it seemed perfectly clear. Now the intention has completely disappeared. Or consider another familiar experience. You're searching for your keys, your glasses, or your phone. You check every pocket. You move things from one place to another. You become increasingly convinced that the object has vanished. Then, a moment later, you discover it was in your hand, or sitting exactly where it had been all along. Freud argued that these events should not always be dismissed as simple carelessness. Instead, he suggested that they may express something happening beneath conscious awareness. They may reflect unresolved emotional conflicts. They may reveal wishes that have been pushed out of consciousness. Or they may indicate tensions that the conscious mind has not yet recognized. One of Freud's favorite examples involves slips of the tongue. He believed some slips are so revealing that they can hardly be called ordinary mistakes. They are not merely speech errors. They are moments in which an unconscious thought briefly breaks through into conscious speech. If you have never read Freud, I would recommend beginning with one particular book, The Psychopathology of Everyday Life. Unlike some of his longer works, this book is filled with short, engaging examples drawn from ordinary experience. Rather than discussing abstract theory, Freud examines familiar situations that almost everyone has encountered. That makes the book surprisingly accessible even for readers with no background in psychology. One example is especially memorable. Imagine an organization that has spent years struggling to gain official recognition. Its members have worked tirelessly. Applications have been submitted, requests have been rejected. Again and again, they have been told to wait. Finally, after years of effort, recognition is granted. The organization schedules its first official meeting. The audience fills the room. There is excitement. There is applause. The chairman walks to the podium to begin the ceremony. He smiles, looks at the audience, and proudly announces, "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to declare this celebration closed." Of course, he intended to say opened. Instead, he said closed. Freud regarded this as a classic slip of the tongue. The chairman consciously wanted to begin the event. At the same time, another tendency, one outside conscious awareness, briefly entered his speech. For a moment, the unconscious won the competition between the two intentions. Freud would say that the hidden wish had found its way into language. Whether that unfortunate chairman remained in office afterward is another question entirely. More often, however, slips of the tongue are less obvious than this example. In everyday conversation, they usually involve two competing verbal intentions. One is the word the speaker consciously plans to say. The other comes from an unconscious source. For a brief moment, those two words collide. The spoken result is neither one nor the other. Instead, it becomes a curious blend that reveals traces of both. That, according to Freud, is precisely what makes these mistakes psychologically interesting. Let me describe another example that Freud discusses. I won't reproduce the original German wording because the psychological point is much more important than the exact phrasing. Imagine a young man from a modest family. He has fallen deeply in love with a young woman from a wealthy, upper-class background. He admires her from a distance. Whenever he sees her, he becomes so nervous that he cannot even bring himself to start a conversation. Finally, one evening, after they both leave the theater, he gathers enough courage to approach her. This is the opportunity he has been waiting for. His hope is simple. He wants to ask whether he may walk her home. Everything depends on saying a single sentence. But at the crucial moment, something unexpected happens. Freud points out that this is not a case where one word is simply replaced by another. Instead, two different verbal intentions become fused together. The word he consciously intends to say, escort, or walk you home, is interrupted by another word carrying a very different meaning. The result is a bizarre combination, as though the ideas of accompanying someone and striking someone have collided into a single expression. Naturally, after saying something like that, he is unlikely to accomplish either goal. He will not be walking her home, and he certainly has no intention of attacking her. The important point is not the social embarrassment. The important point is the psychological mechanism. Two competing tendencies entered speech at the same time. One belonged to conscious intention. The other emerged from somewhere outside conscious awareness. According to Freud, that hidden tendency briefly revealed itself before the conscious mind had the opportunity to suppress it. Now, let us move from slips of the tongue to another category of everyday mistakes: losing things. Freud was especially fond of examples taken from his own life. He tells the story of a beautiful and rather expensive pencil that sat on his writing desk. It was a gift, not something he used every day, but something he valued. One day he looked at his desk. The pencil was gone. It had apparently disappeared. How should one search for it? Most of us would immediately begin emptying drawers, checking every shelf, moving books, papers, and notebooks from one place to another. Freud suggested a completely different approach. Instead of asking, "Where could the pencil be?" he asked himself, "Who gave me that pencil?" The answer immediately came to mind: a relative of his wife. That thought led to another association. What had recently happened involving his wife? One memory led naturally to another. Soon, he found himself thinking about a small family disagreement that had been occupying his attention without his fully realizing it. As that hidden emotional issue became conscious, Freud looked back at his desk. The pencil was exactly where it had always been. It had never disappeared. He simply had not noticed it. From Freud's perspective, the interesting question was not where the pencil had been. The interesting question was why he had failed to see something that was directly in front of him. That, he believed, was another example of how unconscious conflicts can quietly influence ordinary perception and everyday behavior. Let me give you one example from my own experience. Strictly speaking, it is not a slip of the tongue, but a slip in writing. This happened several years ago while I was teaching an introductory psychology course to first-year students. Some of you may remember our discussion of Max Wertheimer and the phi phenomenon, the classic demonstration showing how the mind creates the illusion of movement when two stationary images are presented in rapid succession. Fortunately, situations like this are not common. But anyone who regularly lectures in large classrooms knows there is always one challenge. At some point, people in the audience begin talking among themselves. That day was no exception. There was a quiet but persistent murmur in the room. Several students were carrying on their own conversations while the lecture continued. As I explained the phi phenomenon, everything seemed perfectly normal. My speech was clear. I described the intervals of roughly 50 to 100 milliseconds that produce the illusion of motion. Nothing unusual happened in what I was saying, but something different was happening with my hand. While I continued speaking, I was writing on the board without paying much attention to it. I drew one vertical line, then another, then a curved line beneath them. I did it confidently, without hesitation, and without ever looking closely at what I had written. Naturally, students noticed it immediately. Among every group of psychology students, there are always a few who recognize the Greek alphabet. One of them raised a hand and asked, "Professor, what exactly did you just draw?" I assumed I had written the Greek letter phi, since that was the topic of the lecture. But after looking at the board, I realized I had written something entirely different. Instead of phi, I had written psi. The most interesting part was that I had not noticed the mistake at all. Only after colleagues pointed it out later did I become aware of what had happened. So what makes that example psychologically interesting? There is nothing mysterious about the symbol itself. The Greek letter psi has long been recognized as the symbol of psychology. If we were to interpret the incident in Freud's style, we might say that while the lecturer was consciously explaining the phi phenomenon, another message quietly appeared through the movement of his hand. It was almost as if the unconscious were saying, "You're in a psychology classroom. The students came here to study psychology. Stop talking among yourselves and pay attention." Whether Freud would have accepted exactly that interpretation is impossible to know, and Jung would almost certainly have offered a different one. Those are separate theoretical questions. My purpose here is much more modest. The example simply illustrates Freud's broader claim. According to him, even our smallest everyday mistakes may contain psychological meaning. Whether we accept that conclusion or remain skeptical, the examples encourage us to look more carefully at actions we would normally dismiss as meaningless accidents.